In this video, we're going to look at some of the basic things that you need to know about working with dynamic arrays. We have a very small sample of data here. We have invoice date and we have invoice amount. And we want to create a formula that tells us if the invoice is more than 30 days old, then we want to say due. And if it's less than 30 days old, then we want to say not due. Now to do this, we would use the most well-known function in Excel, an if statement. So let's go ahead and let's create a standard if statement. So we can say if, and it's looking for our logical test. So we can say if today minus 30 days is greater than the invoice date, then what do we want? Well, the value that we want is that it is due. Otherwise, the value that we want is not due. Very simple if statement that you would all be familiar with. And when we drag this formula down, we can see what is due and what is not due. Now, when we created this formula and when we dragged this formula down, the formula is recalculated on each cell. And you can amend the formula within any of the actual cells themselves. So if you click into any of these formulas, you can say F2 to edit, or you can edit up in the formula bar. That's different to how dynamic arrays work. Let's just go back here and we're going to delete this and we're going to start again. But this time we're going to write that if statement as a dynamic array. So we're going to say if, and our logical test is going to be if today is greater than, or today minus 30 is greater than, and this time instead of just selecting the one cell, we're going to select the entire range of dates. So we're going to select an array. Now previously in Excel, you could select an array, but if you selected an array, you would have to press Control, Shift and Enter. Then you would get these curly brackets shown in your formula. But with the new Excel, with the new dynamic arrays, you no longer need to press Control, Shift and Enter, and you no longer see these curly brackets. Excel now thinks in arrays and it expects more than one formula or more than one cell. And when it gets more than one cell, it's going to return more than one cell. So let's just put in our value if true is going to be due, and our value if false is going to be not due. And we can close that formula and then, like any other formula, hit enter. And we see with just the one formula that we have now got values for all of the cells going down because we've selected this array here. So by selecting this array, the spill range is going to be the same. Now, what do I mean by the spill range? Well, do you see this blue square around the data? That represents your spill range. So if you have an array, it's going to spill across into other cells. But sometimes you're going to have something in the way. For example, let's say somebody had already put in here due, for example. Now we see that we get this spill error, which lets us know that the formula can't spill, the results can't actually spill to where they're needed to be. Now we can resolve this error. So we can say, if we click on the error, we say spill range isn't blank, and we can select the obstructing cells. By selecting the obstructing cells, it jumps straight to them, and we can then delete the content that's in them or move the content somewhere else so that our spill range actually is able to spill. Now, what else can you notice here within the spill range? Well, I have this cell down here, C15 selected, and you can see this formula up here is very grey. If you try and click in it to amend it, you can't click in it. If you press F2, you can't click in it to amend it because the formula only resides in one place, and that is the top cell in which you entered the formula to. Now, the thing with dynamic arrays is that they are dynamic. The more content that you select, the further they will spill and so forth. But if we were to update this data set as it is, so let's go ahead and put in the 1st of June 20 and let's put in a value, we can see this spill range has not spilled. Now, why hasn't it spilled? Well, it hasn't spilled because if we go back to our normal reference, we selected these cells. So we actually selected an array that doesn't include that additional cell. So we could just then go ahead and update our array and our spill will also update. or we could move to using tables. Now, there is also a problem when you are using tables with dynamic arrays, and that dynamic array functions themselves do not work in a table structure. Let me just go back and we will Control T this to turn this into a table. And you see now that I've changed it all into a table, the spill comes back in. And that comes back in because it doesn't work in tables. So I'm going to convert back to a range. Say yes to convert back to a range. And now I'm just going to select these two columns here. And with these two columns, I'm going to convert these into a table. So now if we go back to our formula, and instead of selecting the actual cells, if we select the entire column from the table and hit enter, the spill will update when we go ahead and add a new row to the data. So let's put in another row to this data, and we see straight away that our dynamic array spilled. So if you reference a table range in a dynamic array, it's going to expand as you continue to work on your table. However, dynamic arrays themselves do not work in tables. Let's take a look at something else now. We are going to take a look at the count function, and we are going to now count how many invoices are due and how many invoices are not due. So this is a blank down here because there's nothing in this row. I'm going to delete this one first just to clean it up. So we want the count of the due invoices. So we could use count, and we could use count if, and we are going to count our status. Now, when we select our status and pull it down, we see we get this hash symbol. We can just bypass this and press in the hash. And once you press in the hash, what this will do is then reference the entire dynamic array. So we want to count them if they say due. Close the bracket and hit enter. And now we see we have 8 due invoices. Let's expand our table again, and let's put something in for the 1st of May. And we'll put in another 15,000 this time. And this now says due, and this is updated to count the additional invoice because we've selected the entire spill range. So to select the entire spill range, when you select the cell that the spill formula is entered into or the dynamic array has been entered into, you then need to press the hash sign to accept the entire dynamic range or the dynamic array. You can also reference formulas or reference cells that contain dynamic arrays as individual cells, and the values remain intact, although they're not fully within the cell. So let me just say if this equals to due, then we want yes, then we want yes, otherwise we want no. I know this makes no sense, but just to show you, you can actually reference one particular cell in a spill range for other formulas if need be. And we see that this particular invoice is not due. So there are some basic points that you need to understand about using dynamic arrays.